I would just like to start by pointing out that David has achieved such rock star status. When you usually go to a conference, like you're in the green room for 30 minutes before you're getting ready, this guy at this point rolls in about 20 seconds before, like a full G, and just walked in. So let's just acknowledge David and who he's become.
You are the rock star. You're on TV every night.
I am. But I woke up this morning because I wanted to learn from you. We all do. So I want to start with getting your assessment. If I were to ask you, let's say January 1st of this year, give us a snapshot of how you see the global economy. I'd love to get it from you January 1st, and then we'll do today.
Well, despite what was said in the campaign, at the time at the beginning of the year, the global economy was in reasonable shape, and the U.S. economy was in reasonable shape. Think about it this way. The U.S. has roughly 5% of the world's population, but we have roughly 18% of the world's GDP. So our GDP is roughly 3 times our population would suggest it should be. So we're in reasonably good shape. At the time, last year, the U.S. economy grew at about 2.4%. Unemployment is like 4%, pretty low. Inflation was coming down, not quite at 2%, but maybe slightly below 3%. So generally, a reasonably good economy. And so I would say the economy, despite what was said in the campaign, was reasonably good in January 1. Today, there's uncertainty. What business people like is certainty. Just tell me what the rules of the game are, and I will kind of figure out how to deal with it. But right now, there is uncertainty, obviously, because the policies of the administration change from time to time, and the people are reluctant in the business community to say critical things about the administration. So they tend not to do it in public, but in private, they have been telling the president, from what I understand, and from talking to some of them myself, that there's uncertainty and the tariff policy is not going to produce the kind of results that the president originally thought would produce.
Does that give you any concerns that people, business leaders, are unwilling to voice their views publicly? Throughout modern history, business leaders, especially in the last 10 years, regularly speak about how they see the world, how they see whomever is in the White House. And now this silencing, what you say, business leaders speak to you privately. I'm amazed in the last 2 weeks how many business leaders are sounding alarms who I speak to privately and who won't say a word.
Well, it's not the business leaders only.
Sure.
It's the congressional leaders have not been, at least on the Republican side, been willing to criticize the president publicly at all, or the administration. So clearly, the way this president operates is that if he disagrees with you, he will call you out in a very visible way, and people don't like to be called out and criticized in public. So it's a very effective technique that has worked to quiet people. In private, they're telling him now the economy has some real risks, and if changes aren't made in the tariff policy, you risk going into a slowdown or a recession.
It's an effective technique. But do you believe it's one that should be employed in a democracy in the most powerful country in the world?
You don't get the people. People don't change their approach when they're in their late 70s. I'm in my mid 70s, and generally, people.
You're really open-minded right now. In a couple of years,
so I think people. President Trump's way of dealing with things is not to do it as subtly as maybe some of his predecessors did, or do it as privately. If he has a disagreement with people, he will say it publicly, and that has been an effective tool, rightly or wrongly, to getting what he wants. Now, he doesn't get everything he wants, obviously, but clearly, think about this. President Trump was a businessman who was, reasonably successful, but not the most famous businessman in the United States. He had a TV show that got him some attention, and he took that and parlayed it into being the Republican nominee in 2016, and to the shock of everybody, gets elected president. After 4 years as president, he later found out that he was impeached twice. He had the results of January 6th, 5 indictments, I guess, or convictions, and 2 convictions and so forth. I don't think anybody has come back from as far as he came back since Napoleon left Elba. Napoleon was put into Elba, and nobody thought he'd ever come back, and he came back and ruled France again. So that Trump came back from Elba, Mar-a-Lago, and has run the country again and won the election is astounding. So he's obviously got an enormous amount of skill to be able to pull that off. he won the election. It was an election that he thought he would win all along. He thought he would beat Biden if Biden ran, but who knows what would have happened. It's clear the election was closer than some people say. If 230,000 people had voted differently in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris would have won, which she would have won those 3 states. So it wasn't a landslide, but it was enough for him to feel he had a mandate, and he's acted fairly decisively trying to get things done. It hasn't been as easy as he thought to get things through Congress, and clearly getting a peace negotiation in Israel and Gaza is not easy. Getting an Iranian agreement is not easy. Getting a peace of settlement in Russia, Ukraine is not easy. And getting the Chinese to do what he wants is not easy. So he's not going to say all this publicly because it's not his personality, but I think he's obviously gotten the attention of a lot of people, and I think he'll get some things done, some things he won't get done.
Given that he was elected president twice and everything that happened in between, I would argue he's probably the most skilled politician we've ever seen. But many people have said they were excited about this president because he was a great businessman. When he was a businessman in New York, did Carlyle ever do business with him?
We did not, that I'm aware of. We have a real estate business. We had not done business with him, but many leading business people in New York had not done business with him. I don't think he was well known at J.P. Morgan or Blackstone or Apollo for doing business with them. He was an entrepreneurial businessman who basically built a small real estate business that his father kind of had built, and took it to Manhattan and built a business there. But think about it, he came from really relatively nowhere. I remember one time I interviewed him at the Economic Club of Washington. I had gotten to know him a little bit from some things. When my parents retired from Baltimore, they moved to a suburb of Baltimore called West Palm Beach, Florida. And when I used to do family events, I would rent out a suite at the Mar-a-Lago thing. It was
where most people have their family events.
Right, so yes. But you just needed a credit card. I wasn't a member. And so he would come and he introduced himself to me, and I met him a couple times, and as the head of the Economic Club of Washington, I said, I'd like to interview you. And he said, okay. And he came into the green room, I think it's in December of 2015. And he said, ask me anything you want, but for sure, ask me 2 questions. What are they? One, ask me if I'm going to run for president. And I think I said, president of what? And he said, President of the United States. I said, look, Donald, I don't know you that well, but I think, going from being a businessman in New York to being President of the United States, that's a big leap. I didn't take it that seriously. Obviously, I was wrong. He also asked me to pull his hair. He said, people don't think the hair is real, and then you show them it's real hair.
And you pulled it?
No, I said, I don't feel comfortable. I'll ask you about your hair, but I didn't pull it. And, he had a good sense of humor about himself, and, but think about it. We've had, 47 people serve as President of the United States. And he was the first one who never had any government experience. Everybody else had either been in the government or had in military or civil experience. He had none. And to be able to go from that to be President of the United States was an incredible leap. And to do it a second time is quite something. So I know a lot of business people who say, hey, I'm more talented than him and I should be President of the United States, but they didn't do it. And he had the courage to run. And so while I don't agree with all of his policies, and I think he's got some challenges, and clearly there's uncertainty, you have to admit he came from nowhere and has a force of personality that is unusual even in the business world.
He sure does. How would you assess how things are going with the trade war? Ken Griffin was on this stage just 2 days ago, and I believe he said he thinks it's devolving into nonsense. And one of the big concerns is how it's making us look on the world stage and how people view the United States as a global superpower.
Well, I want to preface my remarks by saying I have no animus towards the president. I was the chairman of the Kennedy Center for 14 years. I'm no longer the chairman of the Kennedy Center. Been succeeded by the president. I'm the first person ever fired by a president and succeeded by him. So he's got the job, and so, but I was ready to retire anyway, so I don't bring that into my calculus. Clearly, the global economy is not doing as well as President Trump thought it would do. I think the reaction to the rollout of the tariff policies hasn't worked as well as he thought, and I think no one in his administration, if they're being honest, will say that this is working exactly the way we want it. Clearly, you have to get the president off of a ledge. He's not famous for saying, I made a mistake. He's not going to do that. So you need to find a way for him to pivot, and I think his advisors are looking for a way for him to pivot, which will give him the ability to say, I got something for what I did, and I didn't just waste my time. And so I think if he can negotiate some deals with our trading partners, that'll be a plus. The biggest challenge in the tariff world is China. When you can beat up on lots of people in this world and they can't fight back. If you're dealing with a subcontractor in Queens who's building a building with you and you don't like the way they're handling it, you can say, look, I'm not going to pay you the full thing, and maybe you can negotiate a settlement. It's hard to beat up on the president of the biggest country in the world with the second biggest economy in the world, and who's going to be president for a long time after President Trump is president. And so I don't think you can intimidate Xi Jinping in a way that, I think, some people might have thought. I've met with Xi Jinping, and he's a pretty imposing person. And the first time I met him, I was a chair of a Chinese investment group or an advisory board to a university, business school. And I happened to be the chair of it. And we get to the meeting that day, and they say, okay, you're the chair of this now. And the first thing they said was, we're going to go meet with a Chinese leader. I said, okay, so we get on a bus, and with people like Tim Cook and Steve Schwartzman and a whole bunch of very famous people, more famous than me. And I happened to be the chair because nobody else wanted to be the chair, I think. And so the first thing that happens, they show up with the senior leader, and it turns out to be Xi Jinping. So how am I going to have a conversation? I didn't really know him. So I felt like saying, well, there's a saying that a trip of 1,000 miles begins with a first step. That's a Chinese, saying. I told him, and he said, well, that's a Chinese fortune cookie statement. So I realized I shouldn't be quoting Chinese proverbs to Xi Jinping. But he's a tough man, and I don't think you can intimidate
him. You gave him a fortune cookie line?
Well, maybe, I don't know. Sometimes I read things in the fortune cookies. Maybe I thought they were Chinese proverbs. You never know where these proverbs are coming from. But he's running an economy that is the second biggest economy in the world. And Americans have said repeatedly, China economy is weak. China's economy is going into recession. And we've been saying that for 10 or 15 years, and they don't quite go down as much as we think it's going to go down. And China's economy has an enormous amount of resilience. Also, the people in China, they've lived through the Cultural Revolution. They're used to suffering. They can take a lot of downtime and adversity, maybe better than we can. So I don't think you can intimidate China into agreeing to what you want. In the first term, the president began with tariffs, and there were negotiations. There was a trade agreement. Probably wasn't really honored by the Chinese, in part because of COVID. This time, I think having tariffs of 145% are just unsustainable, as people have said. Well, I suspect there'll be some negotiation to kind of change that. But in the whole, the president is getting a lot of what he wants done. Not everything he wants done. I suspect he'll have more success in getting some things through Congress.
What do you think he's getting done?
I think there will be a tax bill at some type. It won't be exactly what he wants, but there will be some tax bill. Clearly, he's made a difference in things he wants to make a difference in. Whether they're right or wrong is another issue. But DEI, for example. DEI is something that was part of the fabric of the government of the United States, and I'd say society, and now there's been a pullback on that, and I think it's had some impact on corporations moving away from DEI, rightly or wrongly. So he's had some impact there. Clearly, he's had some impact in cutting some spending from the federal government, but probably not in the way that he may have initially anticipated.
What do you think about that? What do you think about DOGE when you think about all of these federal jobs cut and even how they're going to impact regional economies around the country?
Okay, so the federal budget is roughly $8 trillion, and we run roughly a $1.82 trillion annual deficit. And the result of that is that we now have roughly $36 to $37 trillion of debt. That's unsustainable on a long period of time. And the only way you can solve the debt problem 5 ways. One, you can just cut spending. That's not easy to do, but that I'll get back to in a moment. You can increase taxes. Nobody wants to do that. You go to the IMF for a bailout. That's not realistic. We're too big. You can basically say we're going to default. Well, you're not going to default because the U.S. government, the debt is the center of the global economy. Or you can simply say, I'm going to let my grandchildren and great-grandchildren pay it off in devalued dollars. And that's essentially what we're doing now. So I don't have any great-grandchildren yet, but my grandchildren will start paying this off down the road in devalued dollars. And eventually the dollar will devalue. The bigger risk we have in the global economy is, the biggest risk for the United States, is that we borrow so much money that if people don't buy our bonds, ultimately we're not going to be able to sustain this debt.
Are you concerned that's about to happen?
I'm concerned that the value of the dollar, it may not be as strong as we would like it to be. It's lost 3% of its value since January in terms of values against other currencies. So we've got to keep the dollar strong because that enables us to keep borrowing all this money. We don't have a sovereign wealth fund yet in the country. We have a printing press. We print dollars, and that's how we've sustained this lifestyle we have. But President Trump has been trying to cut it, and I think Doge has been an effort to do it. It hasn't worked as well as I think anybody in Doge thought it would work, or even the president thought it would work. But it's obviously an effort to cut some spending, but it's not going to have that much of an impact. I think Elon Musk said he was going to cut $2 trillion out of the budget at one point, $2 trillion out of the $8 trillion. Then he said, I think, $1 trillion. And now I think it's below that.
$150 billion.
So it's not that easy to cut spending, and it's very difficult. And Congress tries all the time to cut spending, and it hasn't really worked. So I can say I have some experience with Doge, and I'd say it's complicated to think that they can get all these things done. And if Elon Musk leaves at the end of May or reduces his time at the end of May, and he kind of is part-time, it'll have less impact than it probably has had now.
I want to ask you about a former employee of yours, Jerome Powell. Has his job gotten, I thought his job was really hard post-COVID. Has it gotten exponentially harder now?
Jay Powell worked for Carlyle for 8 years. I hired him he left the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. Very nice guy. He was a lawyer by training, not an investment banker, not an economist. I think he's actually done a pretty good job for these reasons. One, he explains what he's going to do before he does it, which many Fed chairs didn't do. When Paul Volcker and Alan Greenspan were the chairs of the Fed, they would take action, and you had to figure out later what they really did because they didn't have press conferences. After the Fed takes action now, Jay Powell comes out and explains it within a half an hour exactly what they did. And I think he's got the confidence of the board and the confidence of the people setting interest rates. I think he's done a pretty good job. If there was any mistake, I think many people made the mistake of using the word transitory when COVID began to infect our economy. And we spent, the Trump administration and the Biden administration spent roughly $5 trillion of money that was not correspondingly dealt with tax increases. So we spent $5 trillion more than we otherwise would have spent. And by doing that, you produced inflation, and it wasn't transitory. When they recognized at the Fed that it wasn't transitory, they began increasing interest rates. And now they've gotten interest rates down, or inflation rate down to slightly below 3%. Getting it to 2% is difficult, very difficult. Before, when all of us were, many of you my age, were in college, the college textbooks would say the standard rate of inflation in a global economy is probably 3 to 4%. But under Paul Volcker, when Paul Volcker came in, he increased interest rates 200 basis points one weekend, and interest rates ultimately went down to about 2%, and we had 2% for 25 years. But we also had a recession or two, and as a result of that, initially, Jay Powell has avoided a recession. We haven't had a recession for more than 7 years. In our economy, usually you have a recession roughly every 7 years, except for a technical recession during the COVID period of time, which wasn't really a recession. We had 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth.
Do you think we're in one or heading into one now? Do you think we're in or heading into one now?
When I worked in the White House, there was a inflation advisor named Fred Kahn, and he went into the White House briefing room one day and said, I think we're heading into a recession. And Carter hauled him into the Oval Office and said, look, I'm running for re-election. Do not use the R word. It scares people. But he said, I'm an honest guy. What am I supposed to say? Just don't use the R word. So from then on, he went and said, I think we're heading into a banana. And he used the word banana as a different word for recession. So the reporters wouldn't say, we're heading into a banana. They would put that in the headline. I think the economy is slowing down. You
have the wackiest stories.
If you have $8 trillion in a budget and you chop it too much, you're going to probably reduce government spending by enough so that it slows down the economy. If business people don't want to do deals, if business people are afraid of taking companies public, if there's a freeze on spending because we don't know where the rules of the road are and what the policy is going to be on tariffs, you do have a slowdown, and that could produce a banana. We don't know. I think it's too early to say. Usually you don't know you're in a banana till the banana's already in place. But as to Jay Powell, I think he's done...
If one were to say, do you think we're banana bound?
I would say at some point there will be a banana.
In this year?
I don't know. I'm not good enough to predict. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm not an economist. But I would say if you scare business people into not spending money and not investing, you scare consumers into not spending. And if prices go up very much and you get high inflation, you will probably produce a banana or some other fruit. But so I don't want to say it's going to happen because I'm not an expert in that area, but I would say there's yellow lights going on now in the economy, and I think it's not irreversible though. Tomorrow the administration could say, well, some of the things we wanted to do, we're not going to do them right now. We've got higher priorities, and we're going to put them on the back burner. And I think some people would say, let's focus on getting the tax bill through and getting a budget through Congress and dealing with the kind of day-to-day issues, the bread and butter issues that American consumers have to face. So I would say it's challenging. As to Jay's job, I think one of the things he's done very well is not respond to criticisms. How many of you here would like to be beat up by, the leader of the free world and just not say anything in your defense? But Jay has been very good at basically keeping his head down, not criticizing anybody who's criticizing him, and just dealing with the problems that the Fed sees. And I think the Fed has done a pretty good job of getting inflation down. Interest rates are higher than they were, 8 years ago, but that was because COVID came in and basically we saved the economy from really devastation because of the things we did in spending money, and we had interest rates that had to go up as a result of that.
We are out of time. I appreciate this Baltimore lawyer, baseball fan, David Rubenstein, joining us this morning and sharing his expertise.